Hi everyone, my name is Erica. Today I'm going to show you how to make a prong setting. We're going to use a 9 to 10 millimeter gemstone. This one is like 9.75 millimeters or 9, it's almost 10 millimeters. And we're going to use 21 gauge square wire to make the prong setting. You're going to need 3 to 4 inches. It's according to how thick your ring band is or bracelet band or whatever you're hooking it to. You have to leave room for your prong setting and plus a little bit of wire to be able to wrap around to anchor it to whatever you're making. Anyways, so I'm going to measure out 4 inches because I am making a thicker band of ring, a ring that has a thick band. So I'm going to cut 2 pieces of square wire, 21 gauge. I have to straighten this from the spool because it's a lot easier and you don't get wire marks on the end of your wire. You don't get plier marks on the end of your wire here, because if you cut it off and then you straighten it, then you have to hold it with something, right? So you would get plier marks on the end of whichever end you use to hold your wire while you straighten it. So I'm going to do that real quick. Now that I have my wire straightened, I'm going to finish cutting the second piece. I'm going to measure out 4 inches of wire. Sissy. Sorry, it is very loud at my house. You guys don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to share it, just feel free to share it with friends and family or to a group that's asking how to make a prong setting. Just anything like that helps. Okay, so let's get to making a prong set ring. So I'm going to take my 2 4-inch pieces of wire here, and then I'm going to measure my stone. That way I know how far apart to measure to bend my wire. I'm also going to use tweezer nose pliers. You can use flat nose pliers, which look like this as well, to hold your wire while you bend your prongs, because the edge is really straight. It's really straight. These are as well. These are straight, but they have a slant. So you have to compensate for that little bit of a slant. I'm going to go ahead and bend one side, and then I'll measure my stone and we'll go from there. So I'm holding both wires, right? And I'm going to bend straight up. Straight up. So now you have 2 wires that are bent at this angle, and they're both bent in the same area. So we've got a little extra wire here, so I'm going to cut it. It may mess with our measurements somehow. Okay, now I'm going to measure my stone. You can use the calipers to measure your stone, but I always just measure manually. There's really no exact formula for this. I need to get my calipers, or no, not my calipers, but my measuring tool. These have rock dust on them, so I think the plastic on them is just old too, because I can't get it off. Okay, so I'm going to zero these out and set them to millimeter. And then I'm going to go under, and I'm going to measure the bottom of my stone right where I want the bar of my of my prongs to set on my stone. So this part that we're doing now is the part that's going to sit on the bottom of your stone. So we want it about 6 millimeters. We'll do 6.0. Okay, and if we do 6.0, our stone is going to set even right down into it. Oop. Now I have a very fine tip marker, but I can't find it, so I'm going to use my thick one. And I'm going to mark it right at 6 millimeters from side to side. From where we bent our wire at to where we want to bend it again. I'm going to try and hold them together so that I can get the mark on both of them. So it has to be, make sure that you get your wires even. Make sure that these match up right here. That way your measurements are correct on both sides. So I'm just going to do one right now, and then we'll put them together and mark the other one exactly the same as the other. So I'm going to use my calipers, or my measurement tool, and hang on, and then I'm going to mark right where I want to bend again. Still trying to get used to working through a camera. Oh, well, remember it was at 6.0, which is where we want to bend both of our wires. Okay. So I'm going to put this mark all the way around my wire. I want it to go onto this side. And then I'm going to do the same to this wire. Only the mark on this wire is going to be on the top. This is being the top of both wires. I want to make sure that both wires are even before I mark it, or well, as even as possible, as even with each other right here in this crook in the bend of where we bent both wires. Alright. Now I'm going to double check my measurements to make sure that it's 6 millimeters on both sides. Now your measurement has to go with the tip, the points on this. So make sure you go from point to point. And we are at point to point. So I'm going to take my tweezer nose pliers. These are 0-on tweezer nose pliers. I'm going to make sure that both my wires are bent or just right at the same. They need to be the same in the bend right here, in the crook of it. I'm going to go right on this black mark. Now remember, if you're using tweezer nose pliers, to compensate for this slant that goes in these pliers. So you have to hold them even or as even as you can make them, and hold both wires with your pliers. And now I'm going to check my measurements one more time, and then we'll bend both wires at the same time. Right at 6 millimeters. Now we're going to bend them both at the same time. That way you have the exact same prong, exact measurements on both sides. Now we need to measure how tall we want our prongs to be. So I'm going to take my stone and my measuring tool and zero it out because it's negative 0.0 and I need it to be at 0.0. Okay, and so a millimeter, not inch. Now I want my prongs to come right up on these little facets right here. You don't want your prongs to come onto the table of the stone. You just want them to come right up over the edge. So you also have to compensate where you have to bend your wire around each prong. So you need to add on however many millimeters your wire is thick, and then do your measurements. So we have 0.6 millimeters of wire. We're going to bend that around each prong. So you have to add 0.6 millimeters onto everything, or onto these measurements anyways. So our stone, from the base to where we want our prong to sit, which would be right about right there, is 2.2 millimeters. Then we add on 0.6, so that would be 2.8 millimeters. We could go ahead and add on another 6 millimeters because that way we can bend our wire twice around our prong. So that would be, let's see, that would be 12. So we need 2.2 millimeters plus 1.2 millimeters, which would be 3.4 millimeters. So we need 3.4 millimeters of prong. Okay. Now that we have our measurements that we need to make our prong, with wrapping the wire twice around each prong instead of just once, we have 3.4 millimeters that we need to measure on each prong. So we need to make sure they're even, or as even as we can make them. This square on this side is trying to bend, so I'm going to try and make it as even as I can make it. So adjust until you're satisfied with your wire here on each side. I don't know what that would be called because it's not a prong yet. I want to take my pliers to go all the way down on each one. Make sure that these are even where your bend is, as even as you can make them. And that's why it's important to straighten this wire beforehand. So I'm going to take the side that I have my pliers on and flip it to where I can get to it. And then I'm going to measure from right where the bend is in our wire up. I need to mark at least one of these prongs with our measurement, but first I want to adjust them. So it will be hard to adjust once we get our prongs going. Just to make sure that they're flat and even. This bar right here needs to be even. Okay, so I'm going to take my measure and going to measure right where my bend is in my wire. I'll go from this little corner here up, and then I'm going to mark it with my Sharpie. You can do this on each one, but you still have to hold them and bend them both at the same time. So we have 3.4 millimeters that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It'd be really cool to have one of these with something that you can use calipers that are for fabricating, and you can just scratch your wire right where you want to bend it at, but I like to do it like this. Okay, so we're right at 3.4 millimeters in measurement. So I'm going to do that on this side too. Right at the bend in your wire here. Oops. Measure, make sure. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to take this mark on around to the front here of each side. Okay then. Now I'm going to do the same on this one. Only I'm going to hold them together and then mark it. You don't even have to do that. You can make sure that they're even, right? These two have to be perfectly even right here, this in this bend. Hold it where you want to bend it. Bend both. Do the same on the other side. Hold it where you want to bend it. Make sure that they're even down here. If you need to adjust them to make sure that they're exactly the same, then adjust until you're satisfied. So I'm going to hold right. See, I need to move this to where I can see this outside mark too, because that helps me. It helps me anyways. Now make sure that your wires are even right here before you bend anything. Make sure to don't forget to compensate for the bend in your pliers too, or the slant if you're using pliers like this. The reason I only bend them a tiny bit is because sometimes that happens and then you have to adjust them. Just make sure that this stays even right here. That's the most important part whenever you're doing this. Okay. This wire is half hard, alright? Okay, so I'm going to go around and check and make sure each one is bent at 3 millimeters or 3.4 millimeters, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to hold each one right at where this mark is, the measurement mark. And then I'm going to, oops, I got the wrong side. These 0 pliers, they have, sometimes if you use them a lot, each side can be just a tiny bit different. And this side is a little flatter than that side, so I'm going to use this side. And then you bend them like that. I'm going to go on around with this one. I'm going to do the same with these. lot of times I have to remake my prongs, even if my measurements are precise, because sometimes whenever I bend them like this, they end up being uneven. Somehow, I don't know why, but they just do. It happens, you know. If you can't really bend this wire too much, like if you mess up, you can't unbend it, because if you when you bend it back, it's going to mess up. It breaks easy, even half hard, dead soft especially. I like to use half hard because I don't want my stone falling out of someone's ring that they are planning on buying and keeping for the rest of their life. You know? Now, when you go to this part, you see right where your bend is, right? If you bend this wire to where it's completely even with this bar, then whenever you go to wrap your wire around your prong, it's not going to look right and it can bend it all out of whack. So try and grab your wire right above, right where this line is, the top line, right where you put your measurements at. That way, when you go to bend your wire around it, it goes a lot more smoothly and nothing gets bent out of whack. Do the same on